Hello everyone, this is Raji here. As I have mentioned in my previous tutorial that we'll be learning about Swift optionals in the next tutorial. So guys, we'll start working on Swift optionals, understanding the basics of Swift optionals. So in Swift there is a new feature introduced known as optionals which is not present in Objective-C. So let's start working on it. We'll open Xcode, we'll create a new playground and I'll name it as Swift optionals. I'm creating this playground on my desktop. So basically what is optionals? Optionals is a type that handles the absence of a value. Optionals say either there is a value or there isn't a value at all. I'll first let you guys know the syntax of optionals first. Let's declare a string optional string. I'll create another string which is not an optional, which is the normal required string. So as you can see the difference between these two declarations, this is an optional string and this is a normal required string. So what's the difference? First the syntactical difference I'll let you know. So I have created a variable named maybe str which has a data type I have forced data type string on it. So and I am declaring this variable as optional using the question mark symbol. I have put a question mark besides the data type string. So this means now this is an optional variable. And I have created another string which is a required string. I haven't created it as an optional. I have not used the question mark over here. So in the right side panel you can see the difference. The optional string is returning a nil value, whereas the required string where we are not initializing it is returning nothing, blank. So now what's the major difference between these two variables? The maybe str is an optional which will say there is a value or there may not be any value. So right now we are not putting any value in it, so it is showing there is a value nil, there isn't any value in it. But required string has to be set to a value before. Right now we are not setting it at any value, so it has to be set to a value before your constructor finishes. So in this case, in this playground case, we are not using any classes or constructors, so this has to be set before we use it. I'll let you know guys. So we'll try to print both these variables. We'll try to print maybe str and required str and check the difference, which one shows the compiler error and which doesn't. So I'm trying to print. So yeah, I have printed both these variables. Now you can see the difference. Besides maybe str, there is no error. Print maybe str, because maybe str doesn't contains any value, it is showing nil. But besides this statement, the required statement, there is a compiler error which is showing variable required str used before being initialized, which means a required string or a non-optional string, it needs to be initialized first before we can read the value from it. Otherwise it will show a compiler error. But the optional string, it doesn't require any initialization, forced initialization first. You can use it without an initialization. It won't throw any error. This is a major difference between an optional and a non-optional string. So now let's get into the details of these two variables. So now we'll put some values. Right now we haven't set any values to these strings. Now what we'll do, we'll put some values in both these strings and then try to read the value and check the difference. So in maybe str, I'm putting a value. Since it is a string, I'm putting a string value of Raji. And required str, the same thing. And we'll check the difference. I'll use both these print statements. Copy these print statements and print over here, and we'll check the difference. So I have set a value Raji in both the optional string as well as non-optional string. So as you can see the difference on the right side pane. in maybe str it is showing optional Raji, and in required str it is directly printing Raji. Optional Raji, which means this particular variable can contain a value or it may not contain, but right now it contains some value named Raji, so it is showing as optional variable. So this is a basic difference between an optional and a required string. But the major difference is the option. If you don't set any value to an optional string and try to use the value, it won't throw any error. I mean, your code will work properly, but it is not the case with the required string. If you try to create a required string without initialization and use it, then it will show a compiler error that you need to initialize first. So now let's take an example. Let's take a simple example of understand how Swift works. Optional works in Swift. I have already created, I'll create a new variable. An optional variable, and I'm assigning it a value of nil. Okay. I'm trying to use a if clause condition to check whether my string is nil or not. If it is nil, then execute this particular statement, else execute this particular statement. So I'm checking in this particular thing, I'm checking if my string is not equal to nil, then print my string, else print my string has nil value. So as you can see, which statement will get executed? Since I am initializing my string with a nil value and checking if my string is not equal to nil, then print my string, else print my string has nil value. So it has printed my string has a nil value. So like this we can check an optional string. If you want to do a if else check condition or a condition check using an optional string, you can do in this manner. Now there is another feature of optional, which is known as force unwrapping. As you can see in this particular case, my optional string has printed an optional keyword along with my value. So what if I want to extract only my value, not this particular optional keyword? So there is a feature to unwrap an optional variable and print the right value. It is known as forced unwrapping. So unwrapping an optional variable is our next feature. An optional value. So there is a optional variable which I have created with string nil. I'll initialize it with some value, maybe Raji, and so as you can see, my if condition executed over here and it printed optional Raji, but I don't want this optional keyword. So what I'll do is unwrapping. For your information, I'll copy the entire statement over here so that it will be clear to you guys the difference between optional and non-optional thing. So if my string not equal to nil, right now it is printing optional Raji and I don't want this optional keyword. So what I'll do is you just need to add an exclamation mark besides your variable where you are retrieving the value. So see, now you can see the optional keyword has been removed and it is only printing now Raji. So one more time I'll show you the difference. If I don't use the exclamation mark, which is known as unwrapping, it will present me the value with optional keyword, but I don't want this optional keyword, I just want my value. So for that you need to unwrap your optional. Right now this particular string is an optional string. If you want to unwrap an optional string, you need to use an exclamation mark. So your unwrapping will be done successfully. You'll get only the value what you want. So one more time I'll repeat. For creation of an optional variable, you need to declare that variable, and besides the data type you need to put a question mark. So your optional gets created over there. And if you want to access an optional variable with only the value in it, not the optional keyword besides the value, you need to put an exclamation mark besides your variable. Just that is required and the value will get printed over here. So this is known as unwrapping and creation of optional and unwrapping of optional value. So guys, that's it for this tutorial. We have understood the basics of optional. I mean creating an optional and then retrieving the value from an optional, and then retrieving the value of the optional without the optional keyword. So in my next tutorial, there are more things to learn about optional. So in my next tutorial, there will be the optionals part 2. So guys, thank you for looking at my video. And then if you like this video, you can subscribe to my channel as well as like the video, giving thumbs up. Thank you guys. We'll see you in my next tutorial.